This is a Walk for Change interview with Dr. Mary Clifton. My name is Bobby Rodrigo, and I'm your host. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet Dr. Mary Clifton. Thank you for joining me, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I've been rambling a little with talking to everybody about the importance of education and how important it is to, and I give people some of your background, and of course I'll let you be more accurate than I am on that, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had an idea of how important a discussion like this is, and this type of education is, considering where we are in our society, relevant to prohibition, relevant to access to the plant in all levels, and why that is important, particularly for our health. And I was talking earlier about the tentacles of prohibition and in so many areas that it impacts, and then of course the tentacles that it impacts just medically. So I'll start there, but first, of course, please tell us how you decided, what made you decide to go down this path?
Well, I've been an internal medicine doctor for 25 years. And over the course of that time, I've had plenty of exposure to different patients who were using cannabinoid formulations for all kinds of chronic medical conditions. And I was just creating a card here and there and not necessarily, thinking much about it. I had a lot of interest in vegan diet for many years and thought about that for a long time. And then it wasn't until my brother died a few years ago, and I was involved with his hospice at his bedside and was able to just deal with a very difficult experience where I didn't feel like I had the adequate tools to get things under control. I had everything that hospice provides, but he didn't have an easy, comfortable death at all. So it was difficult to watch, and it was frustrating to not be able to take great care of him, even with everything we have today. And then just a few months after that, one of my good girlfriends died of recurrent ovarian cancer, and I was at her bedside too. I mean, I manage a lot of hospice patients, of course, as an internal medicine doctor, but I don't manage a lot of them right at the bedside. So these were both new experiences for me to actually watch the process unfold. And in her case, the process was so much simpler and so much easier for her. And initially, I thought this had to have just been a coincidence. So I went and did some research, but I'm still researching and shooting videos 2 years later. It's not a coincidence. There's plenty of great research around cannabinoid formulations helping in all kinds of places. And so that really drove this education for me. There's just so many doctors that I think would be able to advise their patients, or would at least feel confident referring their patients to another doctor who specialized in it, if they knew at least a little bit about the safety and the ease of use and the benefits for all kinds of common conditions. I mean, I have been running an internal medicine practice now for 25 years, and I still talk to people every day who can't sleep, or who can't get their pain under control, or who still feel really anxious even though they're taking their medicines every day. There are just some problems that I don't think we have great control over yet in medicine. And I think cannabinoid formulations could help.
It's interesting. I was talking earlier, I was giving a little background on why I think the medical side of the education is important from my own personal view. And you mentioned personal stories. And I gave examples of when I was 13 years old, the first time I saw somebody receiving chemotherapy and then getting relief from cannabis. And then at 14 and a half, I had another close friend who also, and I was even describing, I went and bought the marijuana in the park to bring to her so we could roll the joints because she was going through chemotherapy. This is many years ago. And I was talking about how everybody really knows this already. And so that brings up a lot of different things for me, and one of them is, the beating our bodies take, and it's not necessarily some kind of evil thing, but the beating our bodies take from medicine, just to help our body combat diseases, So I ask you, I said, doesn't it make sense to have the most access to all possibilities from a Hippocratic oath standpoint, I guess we could call it, with the medical community? Because I just don't see them, I don't see the majority of the medical community doing what you're doing, even if it's just from, let me go find out the information, I guess.
Yeah, I think it takes a really long time for new ideas to get into a mainstream consciousness for people. But I'm excited. There's a lot of great information available now. There's some really valuable people working very hard at the front lines. And I think even 10 years ago, if you would have given dietary advice to your patient, people would have thought you were kooky,
Not
to
sure.
help them manage their blood pressure or their diabetes. But now we can talk to people about and give some pretty good advice on what we can suggest for managing your diet. Still hard for people to do that, but at least it's gotten into a mainstream conversation. And I think in 10 or 15 years, we'll be in a similar place with cannabinoid formulations. They're hard to ignore. And I was talking to a friend a few nights ago about this, about just, and he was saying, I don't know about all this medical stuff. I mean, but I like to use it recreationally. It's fantastic. It helps me relax. I can hang out with my friends and but I don't know about all this medical stuff. But I said, but listen to everything you just said. I mean, what a powerful product. If, relieving your social anxiety, making you feel I mean, do you really think that's all just happening from the neck up? You think you're getting this in your system and nothing else is happening?
I do tell, in my view, and please, again, I speak as a layman, but in my view, all use of cannabis is medical use as well. It's similar to, I use it as an analogy. I do a lot of farming work. I'm involved in farming as well. And so, with the idea of creating a healthier body, a healthier universe, recently involved in a project in Flint, Michigan. I know that you have strong ties to Michigan. So
I sure do, born and raised.
Yeah, so I've been working in Flint for a number of years relative to a response to the water crisis. But when I got involved in the community, I'm now involved in farming co-ops there, because the health of like East Flint was just horrid. If you look at the community, for example, and what they're eating. So when I think of cannabis, I look at it from that perspective. It's just another add to our agricultural system that will help our bodies heal better. And I agree with you. I don't like to emphasize on, I talk about history, of course, how we got here, but it's about solutions. And you're offering a solutions path. I mean, yes, it's been a long time. Yes, we've been dealing with, yes, we know things. Yes, we know garlic keeps your cholesterol down, but it's not, like you said, 10 years ago, talking about that in a medical office, eat some more garlic. They're looking at you like you have 3 heads. Is that what why I pay you, doctor, to tell me to eat garlic? I can, get this, and so I get what you're saying.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, and to some degree, I really think it's important. I think it's hugely important to a large degree to empower individuals to take back their own health. I think Western medicine, I mean, we spend 11 years at a minimum getting trained to be able to take care of you in a Western medicine model, and to expect somebody who is that specialized and focused on the care that we provide to pivot is just not a reasonable expectation. I mean, we need to know how to take care of you if you go into heart failure, or if you have a stroke, or if you've got uncontrolled high blood pressure, within that Western model. But, to some degree, in large part, it's going to require other people who are very knowledgeable to step in and help, the Western medical doctors, because it's, I'm recertifying for my boards right now. Every 10 years we have to recertify. Right. So I have to do everything that I already do, and then carve out, an hour and a half every day to relearn and be reminded about all of the things that I have to know to go back to my boards, dermatology and hematology and immunology and gastroenterology. And it's really fun because it's like being back in medical school again. But I don't know how anybody finds the time to do all of this and then to think innovatively. Like, to some degree, you really have to stay in your niche. If you're a surgeon, you've got to make sure you're a great surgeon, and So you just have to find people that you can trust that can help you with things that you're not good at.
That's an amazing, that's amazing. And I'm glad you said that, because most people, including myself, are easily forgetting the extensive education you have to go to just to not know about cannabis. I mean, let's put it that way.
Yes, that's exactly it. Like, it's
right?
just,
I mean,
it's not.
there's plenty of foundation we got to lay before we can even, it's interesting. And of course I talk about the lack of formal education about the endocannabinoid system. I know we talked about that offline. And obviously, the more that is brought into education in medical establishments in the country, that's going to help what you're talking about, obviously, and take some time. Because if you don't learn it, how can you have an opinion about it? And you've got, like you said, 11 years of knowledge. I'm good. I can handle this, right? I mean,
yeah. And really, like in board review now, I think like I was so naive to imagine that I could handle it, like I'm going to be a general internal medicine doctor. And then how exactly are you going to remember everything about hepatitis and COPD and strokes and heart disease and the common cold and menopause? Like, I mean, there's a lot of data in general internal medicine, and you just don't, you just really underestimate how much has to be remembered and and reviewed as frequently as it does. So I don't blame a lot of doctors. I mean, you think in medical school that you can do it all, and then you graduate from medical school and you have a family, and then every once in a while you want to go to a soccer game, and
sure.
it's and then you do just try to stay on top of everything that you have to be excellent in your own field of training. So I applaud people who can step out and do something new and interesting. There's an entrepreneurial nature in me. My parents always, were starting new businesses and trying to think of new fun ideas. And I think I just have that, my dad's spirit, and thankfully my mother's organization, because if you're blessed with my dad's spirit and you don't have my mother's organization, you are a dreamer that will get nowhere. So, he thought up so many crazy ideas, and then my mom would be like, oh, okay, we can do that. Put all the structure around it.
that is true. We all see that the entrepreneur world is crazy if it's not organized. That's for sure.
Yeah, you're really lucky if you can land on the right partnerships to help you, aim your gun before you shoot it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So no, absolutely. I'm with you. So when, I remember whenever I think about the endocannabinoid system and the lack of teaching, I remember I have maybe 10, 12 years ago, I was seeing my ear, nose, and throat specialist. And I remember specifically how, we were having a discussion about how often general practitioners will send you to the sleep apnea world and not, she rolls her eyes, see, they would get along. And he was telling me how, there are other ways to deal with it. And he was describing how when you go to medical school, and you can comment on this, of course, most general practitioners, might have a semester of that specialty, and they don't know. So, or it's not one of the popular ones. And so he battles this discussion all the time. And I always think of that analogy when it comes to the endocannabinoid system. Of course, it's a little bit more extreme because they don't teach it as much. But I think that's kind of the same thing, really.
Sometimes I think very, very conspiracy theory, and with a lot of frustration with the system, that the endocannabinoid system and all of the value of cannabinoids are going to be realized and presented in really logical way in medical schools when there's a downstream consequence to that, when we have pharmaceuticals and the doctors
who funds these schools,
Right. So we need to get it in the established mechanisms of getting a return on investment, and then we'll talk to the kids. I hate to say that, but I feel like the more time I spend in medicine, the more the whole thing is driven.
I think you're spot on. I totally think you're. I mean, it's a numbers game for them anyway. I mean, you've been in medicine all these years. How many times have they said, "Well, here, give away these samples"? And we know that they're. I mean, I'm not giving any great information or new information about the kickback stuff that goes on and how they fund research. And you know, and everybody watches television and sees them advertise drugs that the majority of the advertisement is about the side effects or potential side effects. And then, of course, they're advertising drugs that will combat the side effects of the other drug that and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
you know, so I don't think
it's very much an insurance-based system.
Oh yeah, totally.
And you know, doctors at this point are under the Sunshine Act, where you can Google any doctor and see how much money they've gotten from drug companies. But there's been, in large part, a you know, a very significant limitations placed to that, and anything that doctors get from drug companies is very minimal and has to be associated with an educational experience. And if you have a Minnesota license like I do, the amount of money you can get, or in cash and prizes and, you know, lunches that you can get from drug companies is only $40 a year.
Yeah.
So it really limits the all of those old mechanisms that had shady ethical situations and were in place for years. But but there's still some of that going on in the you know, medical equipment world, or in the, you know, implant world, and there's still enough of that going on, unfortunately.
You raise, you know, you say equipment, and one of the things that people forget, in my view, and just to jump down on a different cliff real quick, is when the legislation is written, let's take the Affordable Care Act, or any legislation, what happens after it's passed, let's say everybody's happy at what they did, is then the lobbyists step in to beat it up before these things are implemented. And they just did that with the medical equipment aspect of it, and just had those aspects changed. So when you mention that, yes, when you mentioned the Sunshine Act, do you think that had, I was thinking that was largely in response to the opioid epidemic relative to hydrocodone.
Oh no, I think
oxycodone.
just response to all of these things. I mean,
Gotcha.
25 years ago, it wouldn't be unbelievable at all that you went and played a round of golf with a drug rep, or that you know,
I remember.
Yeah, there were all kinds of little bonuses like that the drug reps would provide, and those, you know, probably 5 years into my practice or less, you know, largely went away. Yeah, so which is good, I think, except for I think it makes it harder for some doctors who get really busy when they get out of practice and they're seeing a lot of patients, and, you know, they don't really have time to keep up. The drug reps are super knowledgeable about their drugs. And when you choose not to see a drug rep, I would see, you know, doctors that I had practiced with not knowing new medications and not understanding exactly how they work, and still prescribing like they just got out of medical school. There's a little curve here. Like, I mean, I think like a young doctor is great. I think doctors at any age, I mean, my God, if you can commit 11 years of the 80 years you have on the planet to training for anything, then I respect you. But, you know, but I mean, but when you first get out of medical school, you know, you just haven't seen that many patients, and you're at a mastery level, but you're still a kid. And it does take, you know, a few years out in the real world to figure it out. They do say that like between 40 and 50, a doctor is probably at their best. And then when you get to 55 or 60, you know, you really have to make sure that you're keeping up and you're reading and you're retraining so that your knowledge stays relevant.
Especially when you're doing things that work. You don't want to, you're not looking for other ways to make it work, like you say. And that's not, you're not being evil. You're just staying in a place that you're comfortable with. And,
and I think
meanwhile, education.
And you're like, this is my lane and I'm super good at it. And I have very limited complications and my patients do really well. And I love it. And, you know, everything's good. Then, I mean, why change that? Why try to change that up? My problem is just that I've always been attracted to innovation and disruption. And I love things that put patients in charge. And then I'll see patients that in my office, when I used to run an office practice, that would lose 30 or 40 pounds on dietary and lifestyle modification. And I'd quit seeing them, you know, and I would see them 4 or 5 times a year, because you have to see these diabetics and high blood pressure patients every 3-4 months. And then you see them a couple times a year for their colds and their infections. But when they get well, you see them once a year for their annual. They're like, do I really have to come in every every year for this. So, so if I am successful at what I'm trying to do, I'm going to have to close my office. I can't see a patient once a year and get any benefit from that.
Yeah. Well, wellness is a thing. It's important. I recently, I spent some time in Miami recently, and I got to know somebody who runs the supply chain for a hospital down there, and learned a lot.
Yeah.
And stuff that isn't public, and all these wonderful things. And the medical community is a mess in those areas. But I am a believer in the caregivers and the doctors and the nurses, because they, why wouldn't you be? And I think the approach that you've taken is important to the medical community, and to connect and reconnect. Because, for example, what goes on with the VA and veterans and PTSD and they just throw pills down their throat. I mean, we know that happens, and we know that we have a ridiculously high suicide rate happening all the time. And it's not just veterans, of course. PTSD is not just a veterans thing, as you know, or a first responders thing.
Yeah.
Education is the obvious answer, but how the hell do we fix that? I mean, 22 suicides a day is insane.
Well, I think that in a lot of cases, a post-traumatic stress disorder is a socialization issue. I think oftentimes we maintain isolation, and we don't really have an opportunity to realize exactly what everybody else is going through, and to be able to communicate around it and talk about it and move past it, or just have really safe products that allow us to safely live with whatever disturbance we're dealing with. And I think getting past PTSD is embracing cannabinoid formulations.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a really good study that shows that using cannabinoid formulations before your PTSD therapy will make the therapy more effective and help to speed the therapy along. But there's also people who just don't feel good. And, we always think that we have all these opioid addicts, and we have to do something about all these people and take their drugs away. And we have these PTSD people, just get over it. But, I don't feel that way at all about anybody in those groups. In a lot of cases, people are in daily pain, either physical or mental. And we can't just let people sit there like that. I mean, that was when the opioids became available. Our medical school dean came to us, not just some professor. The dean of the medical school presented a lecture on opioids and said, you have an obligation to treat pain. You cannot let people be in pain. We have drugs. And if you don't treat them, it's medical malpractice. And you get in there and use long-acting medicines, short-acting medicines, get them under control. And so we all did. We all marched to that beat, and now we have the problem that we have. But now we also know a lot more about the ECS and how it can help chronic pain.
Right.
And all of those patients all of those patients, I'm going to say that all of those patients can potentially benefit from a cannabinoid added to their therapy.
And I would say, based upon what you just presented, is that now the dean should be going down and saying the same thing again, and adding, not taking away, but saying the same thing. You have an obligation to do pain management. You have to use the tools that we have, and here we have. Yeah. We've always had it, but here we have. Let's forget the past. Let's say it just showed up, and we just found it this morning. So
yeah.
Right. Let's go to here. You have this cannabinoid, etc. Use it. You have to use it. That hasn't
100%. No, that hasn't happened. And that needs to happen. That needs to be the next big step forward. Medical education and communities like that, I find sometimes so difficult to penetrate, because there's so many layers to how you get in front of that audience. Yeah. I love working direct to consumer. I have good channels for working with an individual who needs help, or with a group of individuals who needs help, that are already communicating in mass in pain or in autism or ADHD.
We're going to need to clone you after this interview, though. I want to tell you, we're going to have to get you. You're going to get a lot of calls, and that's okay. I know you welcome it, but the approach is, and I apologize for cutting you off, but the approach is, of course, that you don't exist out there at, as common as it should be. I mean, even 10 of you, accessible the way you are, you don't exist. We need to fix that. And I know you're working to do that. I mean, obviously you're educating the medical community field, but I just had to throw that in there. You're going to get a couple of calls, I'm sure.
Well, the site is really effective at providing great information to people so that they can, educate themselves. And then getting on the newsletter, you'll get all of the latest stuff as I publish it a few days ahead of when it hits the site. So it just is going to make everybody have a lot of fun learning about this, and very easy to share. So if you know somebody else who's going to benefit from learning about Parkinson's disease or, bipolar disorder, or all kinds of esoteric stuff, then, I want one of those videos for any question you might have on my site. And then, of course, if you need private consultations, I'm around, but you don't need $300 worth of private consultation. You may need, I think there's been a lot of heightened expense around consultations for this that isn't necessary either. A lot of times people know a lot by the time they get to me, and they just have one question or two or three questions, and 10 minutes later we're all set. That's an inexpensive consultation. That doesn't need to be, some massive consultation where I review your life history,
So one of the things that has annoyed me about the process of access to the plant in these states that are creating these medical marijuana legislations and access points is that they have these committees and boards that decide what ailments they're going to allow to get a card. Now, I always emphasize to people that no one gets a prescription for cannabis. It is, the DEA runs the prescription world, and it's illegal. And so you get a card so you can go buy cannabis at a dispensary and with no taxes. That's what really goes on, just so everybody understands. But the thing that, getting back to what I'm saying, all of these committees, all these boards, again, goes back to where's the endocannabinoid specialists? Where's the experts that are on these committees who are setting these ailments up? Why aren't you on one of these committees, damn it? For example, well, I mean, it's really, because I look at Georgia, I lived in Georgia for a long time, and one of the worst access, well, there's a lot of places, but one of the worst access, well, you can have it for these ailments. We don't sell it here in the States, so you're going to have to break federal law to bring it here. But if you come here, we'll only arrest you, but we'll release you. I mean, anyway. So, they have this small list, and the people who are making this list have no clue. Some of them are not even in the medical world.
Yeah, I know it's really hard to get on those boards to be able to consider, lists. Or I did approach Iowa recently because they're just opening up, and it's hard. It's hard to get the right activist in the right place. But I also think it's getting better and better. I think even though it's still federally illegal, the whole horse is out of the barn, or the cat is out of the bag, or whatever metaphor you want to use. I just don't see how this is going to be stopped at this point. And
I don't see it. I don't see it stopped. Unfortunately, like has been happening. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of bodies on the way, and that's kind of the way things happen anyway. I mean, it's not something new. Thinking of Michigan, for example, the first person who ever opened a medical marijuana dispensary, who's been operating legally under Michigan state law, is being prosecuted federally as a kingpin, was found guilty. Yeah, that's right, in Lansing, and is found guilty. We have a call to action. The wall could change. His name is Dana Trevino, and the dispensary is called Hydro. Has never done a recreational dispensary. Of course, they just only went legal that way. He's never been accused of doing anything outside the laws of Michigan. There are 80 other dispensaries in Lansing that aren't being prosecuted federally, but he is. And he's looking at 30 years to life for following Michigan law, and no black market. None of that stuff is even alleged. So that's where my body's comment comes from, of course. And it's unfortunate, and we have to continue to support those people and try and change the minds. But it's a little frustrating because, again, the tentacles of cannabis in the medical community, even if we didn't allow anything, it's just, can we keep people alive and feel, help them with their pain and things like that. And I know that's what you work for, so I don't want to go off on a rant, but that's kind of the things that I mean when I say that. It's really hard out there a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like there have been a lot of people that have suffered for far too long under the prohibition, not only patients, which is where my mind goes as a doctor, but individuals who tried to help patients, or
Yeah.
individuals that really don't seem to have committed a significant amount of harm but are paying a lot of price in terms of time in prison. It's yeah, all of that makes me very sad
Yeah,
about
and of
the
course it's
product.
why we do it. It's part of why we do what we do. It's like I'd rather be on the lake. I mean, it's doing well, not today, but I'd rather be on the lake.
Not today.
Relaxing. I say that a lot in the advocacy world. I think I've been an anti-prohibitionist since I've been out of the womb, and it's I talk about like the first time I saw somebody use cannabis. I had an eye injury, and this is how long it's been ingrained in me. I had an eye injury when I was in 8th grade. I got hit in the eye with a baseball with my glasses on. The glass didn't shatter, but the ball in the glass impacted my eye very, very hard, and the pressure in my eye went up. So it went up so high that it knocked out my sight, and then it went so high it knocked out the sight in both eyes. So
Oh,
it was crazy. It wasn't black blindness, it was white blindness, which is probably why I didn't freak out. But I learned that there was a possibility because of the injury that I could develop glaucoma in my later years, which is a pressure disease in the eyes, as you know, at least partially. And of course, I'm in 8th grade, and I know because it's already knowledge that cannabis helps the pressure of glaucoma. So, and here I am, 57, and I'm like, okay, everybody, can we? So that's why I don't argue about this stuff anymore. I was like, I'm not gonna argue about it. Let me just educate, and and I'm just gonna keep like you're doing, because again, it's about solutions. But that's how long. I mean, we've all known this. Damn it. So it's like,
it's really true. It has been a really long time for some of this stuff. Well, I mean, you've got cannabis in medical literature going back 4,000 documented
yeah, big
years.
time.
So, yeah, we have a lot of data around it. I mean, at the turn of the century, it was very readily prescribed. I mean, I remember reading a 1921 recommendation from a London doctor that said if you have a terrible headache, to inhale the cannabis smoke through water. And then you should feel calm and relaxed and headache free and able to return to work. And I'm like, exactly what work are you going to do after you take a big hit off a bong?
A water pipe, right? It's advocate. So that's where they got that bong idea from. Okay, I see. Got it. All right.
I thought that was a really interesting
Sounds more like a water pipe. Anyway, that's yeah, and all of these things exist. And and when I was talking before you came on, I was discussing how, again, nobody has died from the actual physical ingestion of cannabis in the history of the world. It's not possible. And yet, so what are you protecting us from? What is going on here? I mean, if we just eliminate all the conspiracy, all that stuff, what are we being protected from? Because that's ultimately what the government's supposed to be doing here, right? Mm-hmm. So what is it that they're protecting us? I can't come up with an answer. Not one that they'll sell me anyway.
Yeah, what are we being protected from?
Mm-hmm.
I've thought about that myself. Like, I just talked to a fellow regarding recommendations for his arthritis pain. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm all set to do this. I've got my card, and I read the 57-page booklet that Oklahoma has available. And I thought, wow, I mean, I prescribe a lot of medications with a lot of short and long-term side effects. None of them come with a 57-page booklet. And I even wonder about the accuracy of a lot of the data in the booklet.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
how old it is and how biased it is. But 57 pages, wowzers. And I mean, and you're allowed to go down to a bar and get a drink and without a second thought, or smoke cigarettes.
I might have to go get
I
a
haven't
drink
had
now
to
after
read
hearing that. I
a
don't.
page book. I mean, holy moly.
Yeah, that's yeah. And on the alcohol side of it, I won't get into the prohibition discussion about that, but from the medical side of it, you and I had a brief discussion. I know, my feelings about this, and alcohol is probably the most brutal thing to our bodies that is, and considering how many people die from it on a daily basis. And yet, like you said, I've got sangria in my refrigerator. I mean, it's
well, and if you think about, cannabis as going back to the people who are, addicted to opioids, and we have, Israeli data that half of the people that are on opioids for pain management, it can potentially discontinue their opioids when they're on cannabinoids.
right.
There's a totally different risk, not only to that patient, but also to our whole community in terms of diverting the opioids and just making it a safer place to be. It's because a lot of the issues with opioids and opioid addictions are coming from prescription opioids. It's there's the black tar heroin coming in from Mexico, but there's also a lot of the opioids are unfortunately prescription that people are misusing.
Oh, the oxycodone epidemic. I mean, Florida was insane for a while there with the amount of scripts that were being found on the streets and stuff like that. It was one of the worst places in the country. There was a story about how this particular black market person would have a bus literally and take a whole bunch of patients around to doctors to get prescriptions for oxycodone and take them and run with them at $60 a pill and all those other things. It's crazy.
But it still leaves you with a legitimate group of patients who are still in pain and who still need help with their pain.
Right.
So even after we, remove all of the fraud, all of the really, really bad things around opioids, we still have patients that need help with their pain. And I love that we have an alternative that may actually be safer and maybe just as effective.
I think we should go see the dean. I really do. I think we need to go see the dean, have a discussion.
Have a little convo.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, make it fun. We gotta make it fun. And can we get a little pain management discussion with the school here? I mean, one school at a time, one doctor at a time, right? Let's rock and roll. I think, I'm all for following up that. We'll send him this video first and warm him up. Whatever leaps we can do, it would, man, it's, Well, Doctor, I appreciate you spending some time with me today.
I'm
forward
really
to working with you. I know we're going to discuss some things. We won't let the world know about them yet. We'll get to introduce them to them. We'll do a little marketing, right? Your mom will be proud. We'll have some organizational parts to our ideas, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll bring my mom in.
There you go. Look, just letting her know that her influence is working. I mean, but we'll let everybody know how that's going to go, and I'm looking forward to working with you. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I really
and great to talk to you from all the way out there in outer space. Wow.
Yeah, isn't that fun? Look, I can't be at the lake, but
I can be at the moon. I mean, right, I guess that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a thing. I gotta work on my green screen. But hey, what the hell? It's a conversation piece.
Hey, I mean, if you like to be on the moon, you should be on the moon.
That's right. That's what I'm talking about. Freedom. That's what I take liberty with my coffee. I tell everybody. So absolutely, I'm there. I look forward to working with you and getting to know you and getting to know what you do and your organization. And it's a pleasure to know you, Doctor. And thank you so much for coming on the Walk for Change.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Educate. And I look forward to our next time.
Mm-hmm. Next time.
Have a great day.
You too.
So again, that was a marvelous conversation. And I just want to let you guys know a few things that are going on. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Walk for Change. So you probably have heard by now that we intend on walking across the country for change. And you might be wondering exactly what we mean by that. So I want to give you the answer. I want to give you those answers to the question of why we walk for change, why I walk for change. And of course, why you walk for change may be different, but just as important as why anybody else will walk for change. Generally speaking, the Walk for Change is about empowering people for human rights. The Walk for Change is a grassroots movement. Our purpose is to end the abuse and violations of human rights. We will end cannabis prohibition, reform our criminal justice system, obtain true equality, protect children and families, take care of our environment, empower economic freedom, and ensure liberty and justice for all. The Walk for Change begins in Southern California in June of 2020 and heads to Washington, D.C., arriving 3 months later. So that gives you the generalized answer to why we walk for change.